Today we're going to be diving into a statistical review on the Bird Photographer of the Year book to see if there's any factors or trends that contribute to making a good bird photo, or at least ones that rank highly in this competition. Let's get into it. If you're unfamiliar with Bird Photographer of the Year, it's one of the world's premier bird photography competitions. In this year's edition, the competition received over 33,000 entries from photographers all over the world. The competition currently has an overall winner, as well as a few specific categories, including bird behavior, birds in the environment, birds in flight, bird portraits, and a few others. Instead of sharing my own opinions on the winners of this year's competition, I wanted to take a more fact-based and statistical approach, looking at some trends I'm seeing among the photos included in this year's book. The Collection 10 book contains over 200 excellent images that includes information on the camera gear used, camera settings, where the photo was taken, how it was taken, and the species photographed. I hope that after we review these results, you'll have more insights into the factors that go into making a good bird photo and the elements that competitions like these are looking for. The first thing I want to look at is frequent species photographed. It might not be surprising to many, but the most common species group featured in this book was owls. Followed behind owls, we have penguins, cormorants, and grouse. One thing that I found interesting in this summary plot is a single species, the northern gannet, has just as many photographs in this book as the entire species grouping of shorebirds, which has over 200 species worldwide. Taking this same data and grouping it into broader categories, some more distinct trends become apparent. Seabirds and birds of prey make up almost 50% of the species included in this book. I think the other eye-catching thing for me on this plot was flycatchers, warblers, and sparrows, three large species groups that make up around 1,000 species worldwide, only accounted for 3 photos included in this year's book. The next category of stats we have lined up is the location where the photo was taken. I don't think there are a ton of surprises here, but the United States and United Kingdom do stand out, with almost 60 photos being taken in these two countries. My home country of Canada comes in the third spot with 14 images. Grouping this data further into continents, we see that over 170 photos in this book were taken in either Europe or North America. This is followed in descending order by Asia, South America, Africa, Oceania, and Antarctica. In direct comparison to where the photos were taken, I've summarized data on where the photographers are from. These results are quite similar to the locations the photos were taken, with a little bit of shuffling around. This time, when looking at the continental data, over 190 photographers are from either Europe or North America. In contrast, some of the most biodiverse regions in the world are represented by very few photographers. I think these stats speak for themselves in highlighting global inequity in a hobby as privileged as wildlife photography. One of the stats I was intrigued to look at from this data was whether the photographers took the photos in their home country or while traveling abroad. With a 59 to 41% split, the takeaway for me here is you can definitely take good photos in your home country, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have the ability to travel to specific locations for bird photography. The next category is a breakdown of the camera gear that was used to take these photos. Unsurprisingly, the big 3 camera brands of Canon, Nikon, and Sony were used to take the majority of photos in this year's book. Olympus comes in the 4th place position, and unfortunately if you shoot Fuji, there were more photos taken by GoPros in this year's book. Looking into data on the sensor type, a large majority of the photos were taken on full-frame cameras, followed distantly by APS-C and Micro Four Thirds sensors. Looking into the specific camera models used, 3 stand out among the rest: the Canon R5, the Sony A1, and the Nikon Z9. Below these top 3, we have a diverse assortment of both DSLR and mirrorless cameras. Just for a bit of added interest, here's that same data color-coded by camera brand. Looking at the overall split of DSLR to mirrorless cameras, we have about 76% of people using mirrorless cameras and 24% using DSLR. I would expect with each passing year of this competition, we'll see that percentage of DSLR shooters continue to decrease. Jumping into the most common camera lenses used, 2 large telephoto primes stand out among the rest: the 600mm f4 and the 400mm f2.8. In contrast to these 2 large telephoto primes, we have a mid-range zoom in the 3rd place position, a lens that is maybe more well known for its use in wedding photography, the 70-200mm f2.8. As we go down the list, we have several telephoto zoom lenses, a couple wider perspective zoom lenses, and a couple more large telephoto primes. Although 2 large telephoto primes were the most commonly used lenses, when we look at the overall split between primes versus zooms, zooms actually narrowly take the win here, with 51% of the photos included in the book. Over the past decade, we've seen the gap in image quality between primes and zooms narrow substantially. I expect to see this trend continue, and we'll see more and more bird photographers picking up zoom lenses for the flexibility that they offer, whereas big prime lenses will be left for more specific use cases. Next up, we have some interesting findings in the camera settings used across these photos. Starting with looking at focal length, I've taken every photo and plotted the focal length in ascending order on this graph. The big takeaway that I'm seeing with this data is that although we think of wildlife photography as a genre that requires a large telephoto lens, I'm seeing focal lengths that range all the way from as wide as 8mm to 1200mm on the long end. I think these results tell the story that no single focal length is best for bird photography, and it really depends on the scenario you're in and the image that you're trying to capture. Moving on to the aperture of these images, we have a very similar story. We have apertures ranging all the way from f1.4 to f22. While part of this wide range in aperture is likely due to the technical and artistic vision of certain photographs, some of it is also likely due to the physical limitations of aperture in certain lenses. Next up is shutter speed. The images in this book have shutters ranging all the way from multiple second slow exposures to very fast shutters for birds in flight and high-speed action. And finally, we have ISO. While typically part of the game in bird photography is trying to keep your ISO lower, new technology has made it possible to capture high-quality images with very high ISOs. It's not shown on this graph due to scaling issues, but one image in the book had an ISO of 25,600. In terms of camera settings, I think this was the most surprising result for me. Over 50% of the photos in the book stop down the aperture as opposed to shooting wide open. I think this is even more surprising after seeing how many shooters are using large primes like the 600 f4 and 400 2.8. The last category I wanted to look at was stylistic elements in the photos. First up, let's look at the number of birds included in each image. Unsurprisingly, most of the photos in the book included just a single bird, but there was also a significant number of images that had 2 birds or an entire flock. About 45% of the photos had some sort of environmental element that provided context as to where the photo was taken. In contrast, about 55% of the photos were more of a portrait with some clean or nondescript background. About 33% of the photos were small in frame, meaning they look something like this. And going even further, about 7% of the photos were tiny in frame, meaning they look something like this. About 55% of the images were action shots, and breaking down some of the key photo elements a little bit further, we see that just under 50% of the images were taken of birds that were either in or near water, and just over 30% of the images were birds in flight. The classic bird on stick composition represented only about 9% of the images in this year's book. One of the biggest consistencies that I'm seeing among the photos included in this year's book is birds that are either easily approachable or not afraid of humans. More specifically, this can include locations like seabird colonies or other breeding bird locations, or urban areas and tourism centers where birds have become very adapted to people. Subjects that express lots of charisma also seem to do well. Birds like owls, puffins, pelicans, and some other tall wading birds. Along those same lines, large birds seem to do well, and I think this is partly because it's easier to fill the frame with a large subject. Creative photos, or those that are atypical of a traditional bird photo, seem to do quite well. And as we saw in the previous data, both action photos and photos with environmental elements also do quite well. If you're looking to increase your odds of succeeding in competitions like these, it's probably best to not go chasing after skulky or skittish birds, or smaller birds that lack charisma. Along those same lines, rare vagrants and twitches are typically hard to photograph well. And finally, given that there are tens of thousands of images submitted to this competition each year, photos without that added wow element are quite likely to struggle to stand out among the rest. In terms of what largely doesn't matter for competition-winning photos, at the top of the list we have camera brand and camera gear. Although we did have a lot of photographers using flagship camera models and large expensive primes, combinations that may exceed $20,000 in price, there were also a number of photographers in the book using much more affordable equipment. One example of this is my blue-footed booby photo that was included in this year's book. This photo was taken on a Canon Rebel and a nifty 50. I think we've reached the point with camera technology where anything released within the last 10 years is certainly capable of taking professional level photos. One last thing to be aware of in competitions like these is perfection in image quality isn't necessarily as important as you might think. Sometimes an amazing moment or composition can make up for an image not being perfectly clean or tack sharp. I hope this video has provided some insight into the factors that go into making a good bird photo. If you wanted to get a copy of this book for yourself, or submit photos to a future Bird Photographer of the Year competition, I've left links in the description.